All right, guys. Okay, go ahead. We look here.
Hi, everyone. It's Juliette Lovell, and welcome to another Shine On Salon. Tonight, we're featuring Juliette Lovell, who's going to be doing witches through time and space, right?
Yeah, sure.
I
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have any newbies tonight, so you guys all know the drill. It's sort of like a TED Talks with intellectual discourse at the end. And just gonna go ahead and wait. Oh, sorry, popcorn. Everyone say hello. Say your name and where you are.
Please skip that.
Quickly, come on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
What do you want? What our name and what?
Yeah, you gotta come up and
Right,
say your name
sure,
and where you are.
Spotlight.
You gotta stand
Why
up.
don't we skip
Oh.
that?
Just really quickly. Just do it really quickly.
It's gonna be a long talk.
Just quick.
Laura, Sullivan's Island.
Stephanie, Sullivan's Island.
I feel like we're on
Happy
a
birthday. Happy birthday.
Darla, Mount Pleasant.
Bill, Mount Pleasant.
I love the chorus.
Mary, I'm right here.
Where am I?
Kelly.
Dory, Mount Pleasant.
All right, popcorn to Anne. And David, the hand.
Oh, they're on mic. Yeah, they're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Anne and David, Nashville, Tennessee.
All right.
Popcorn to
Yeah.
Bill,
Bill in Boulder, Colorado. Popcorn to Rainier.
Hi, I'm Ranier. I'm calling in from the Netherlands.
Yay. Yeah.
Popcorn to Sophia.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm in Oakland, California. Popcorn to Amy.
Hello, my name's Amy,
And I'm Daisy.
and we are in Berkeley, California. Let's see. Has Jen talked up yet?
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. Popcorn to Anne Marie.
Hi, I'm Anne Marie, and I'm in Southern California.
Hi, I'm Jade. I'm also in Southern California.
And popcorn to Dara.
Hi, I'm Dara in Isle of Palm, South Carolina.
Perfect. You got everyone.
Yes. And
All right.
that level.
Cool. Let me really quickly pull up my slides. Theoretically, they're somehow not showing up right now. Aren't we showing up? I mean, I could totally do it without the slides, but a little less exciting.
They popped up for a moment.
Yeah,
There
there
they
you go.
Great graphics.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone ever needs a PowerPoint made, you can hire me. I'm really good at PowerPoints.
That's good to know.
It's one of my hidden talents. Okay, this is being painful. Well, we'll let that load and I'll just start the introduction. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. You want to sit over here, maybe? I don't know.
I can't see the screen.
Oh. I
I'm
see.
good, I'm good. don't
Okay,
worry.
okay.
Don't worry about
Well,
it.
I'm gonna just like pan in and
Yeah,
out. Cool. So if you don't know me by now, shame on you. To all the ghouls, the fools, and me. Hello, I'm Juliette. I am Alicia's daughter and Gary's daughter. And I have a BA in anthropology and classics with honors, which is exciting to say. And part of the reason I got interested in witchcraft, it'll do it, was through my honors thesis, which I wrote on witches in Pompeii. If you want to read it, it's like 70 pages, wouldn't recommend, but I can send it to you. Okay, this is still going to take its time. Sorry, everyone. But to start, I want to ask everyone a very supposedly simple question. What is a witch? When you think of a witch, what do you think of? What are your associations with the term? And feel free to unmute on Zoom. Feel free to just shout it out.
Broom. Cauldrons.
Yeah?
Magic.
Yeah?
Powers.
Yeah?
Potions.
Yeah.
Green.
Sure.
Pointy nose.
Herbs.
Okay. Warts, is that what I heard?
Herbs.
Oh, perfect. Okay, anything else? Oh,
Spells.
oh, spells. Awesome. I'm gonna cut it off there, but
Black cats.
black cat. So many things. When you think of the witch, there are so many things that we think of. And a lot of the things you said, not all of them, you guys were a smart audience, but a lot of them are stereotypes. And these stereotypes spew from a lot of oppression, a lot of things that were intended to harm, not help the witch as a figure. But witches, as we know it, have become a huge part of our modern discourse, our modern understanding. We think about films like The Craft, shows like Sabrina the Teenage Witch. We think of little kids wearing pointy hats, much like the one I have on right now, and running around trick-or-treating. So the witch has really infatuated people for a long time, but it stems back to the ancient world. So I want to, before we even get started on the history, I want to demystify some of the stereotypes we heard and some that are well known. First, green skin.
Oh, she's a beast.
So if you don't know this, this is from the 1939 movie, The Wizard of Oz. This is the Wicked Witch of the West. So before this movie was released, this figure had no skin color, no mentions of green skin in the book. The green skin was created by filmmakers in an attempt to create a very vivid with coloration with the new Technicolor now on the rise. This was what happened. So they chose green to symbolize her as an outcast, as a symbol. And if you notice, like the sepia tones of Kansas versus the really vivid colors in Oz, they really wanted to showcase that. So that's that. And then I'm gonna do this so that I don't have to move. Sorry. Perfect. Now I'm really up close and personal. So next, the cauldron. A lot of times when we think of the witch, we also think of the cauldron associated with it. So I hope you all recognize these almost infamous words: double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. This is from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And these witches are synonymous with the modern witch and how we understand her. Before this, the cauldron was not really associated with witches. Obviously, modern witches do use cauldrons, and a lot of people do use cauldrons, but the original cauldrons were found in like iron or the late Bronze Age, super way back. So cauldrons have been used as cooking vessels for a long time. And then theoretically, okay, whatever. The next one that'll load eventually. No, not that far. Oh my god, sorry guys. Anyways, we'll get there. Okay, cool. Oh no. This is embarrassing. Sorry. The famous hat, the infamous hat that goes with the witch. So there are a few reasons this may have occurred. First of all, in the 17th century in medieval Europe, it was very common for women to wear a felt-lined black hat that was flat, kind of like you see in this picture. But specifically, it became associated with the Quakers. And in the 17th century, the Quaker religion became prominent, and it was very different than any other version of Christianity at the time. They believed that men and women were considered equal, and they also allowed for women to become preachers. And these women often wore the felt-tipped hat, like you see in this image, and an apron, and then pointed shoes. So they were eventually ousted and often persecuted by the British monarchy. So again, just like the witch, they were seen as a person who's outside the social norm and oppressed because of that. Also, there are some, sorry, this is gonna block it. There is also some connections with Jewish men, Jewish people at the time. So between 1215 through about, I think, the 1600s, anti-Semitism was very prevalent in Europe, as it is kind of now today, but we're not gonna get into that. And the papacy declared that Jews had to wear this hat called the Judenhut, which if you see in the image on the right, the man with the little kind of goldish hat with the point on it, that is a Judenhut. While it doesn't look at all like what we think of with a modern witch hat, again, this was a symbol to oust and force Jews to feel outside of societal norm and like really put a pin on them. So while we don't really know the exact lineage of the witch hat, these are two examples of how it may have come to this witch hat that we associate with witches now. And then, oops. Next, we have the prominent or crooked nose that often people wear prosthetics of. This is a prosthetic on the right. I feel like that's pretty obvious. I'm gonna say it anyways. So again, with the anti-Semitism in medieval Europe, often the images drawn of witches and the images drawn of Jewish people had this prominent nose. And this was a trait of a lot of people of Mediterranean descent at the time, just having like a crook in the nose, having a bit of a crooked nose. It was again in like in England and other westernized European countries. They saw that as a symbol of being outside the social norm, not being of the English, European, white European descent. So that was used to ostracize and harm a lot of people. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other stereotypes I could go into, and I will talk about a few throughout the presentation. But I do want to just talk about what is the witch? What is it? As we know it, why is it different? So yeah, the concept of the witch is universal. There has been a figure of a witch in virtually every society, every civilization since the civilization started. To some extent, obviously, that is, you never want to do an always or off or absolute in any sort of historical study, but there are a lot of historical witches or ideas of witches. And then I also want to say that the figure of the witch is a transcendent being when we think of her in more of an overarching term. And I will say I'm using the female gender terms, and that's just because historically witches tend to be associated with females. That doesn't mean that there aren't male witches. It doesn't mean that men weren't persecuted for being a witch or warlock. But for the purpose of ease, I'm using she, her pronouns. But the figure of the witch.
What? So I thought a warlock was just like a male version of a witch. Are there more differences in that?
There's a lot of convoluted things between terminology. So there can be a witch, there can be a warlock, there can be a sorcerer, there can be a magician. And depending on the time period, it does differ. So for example, in Elizabethan England, Elizabeth I, she hired a lot of male warlocks to help with astrology. Welcome. To help with different things. And then in Jacob I, when he took over reign, he was like, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, a witch is a witch, and you're persecuted regardless. And like in ancient times, it gets even more complicated than that. But it's like, oh, read my thesis and you'll learn a little bit. But yeah, of course. So the figure of the witch is transcendent. I argue that she is a liminal being. She kind of exists on this liminal plane between the present, the reality we know, and the supernatural that we don't understand. She teeters on reality and metaphysical realm. She defies gender norms. She defies societal expectations. And she also, most importantly, understands nature. She understands the dichotomies of life, the difference between good and evil, but not in the sense that we know it, the difference between dark and light, the difference between real and unreal. She's just a beautiful figure, and that's kind of why she's always been present, because she's always just out of reach, but also just within reach. She's amazing. So that's kind of the general theme for this whole thing. But as we begin our journey, we're going to go way back to the ancient times. I do really want to stress, though, we are going to be looking at European standards because that is where the term we understand, especially in the Western world, the witch we understand is fully based off of a white witch. She's based off of European understandings, and we'll go a little bit into the non-European stuff, but it's just a little bit too, I don't want to say complicated, but more, it's just a little bit more complicated, yeah. So we're not going to worry about that. But yeah, let's go all the way back to ancient Greece, beloved ancient Greece, which a lot of modern society has things with ancient Greece in it. The neoclassical revival of like, I think the 1900s, I don't know, whenever that happened, it's a big deal, and it created a lot of Greco-Roman traditions in America and the European world. So naturally, that's kind of where we're going to start. But first, one of my favorites, Hecate, or Hecate, or whatever the pronunciation you want to choose is fine by me. But she is the goddess of magic, of witchcraft, of crossroads, the night, the moon, ghosts, necromancy, purification, ton of things. All very related to witchcraft, very related to the occult, things like that. So she's the child of two titans. Sorry, I realized I put this right in front of the face. She's the child of two titans, Perseus and Asteria, and she rules in heaven, on the earth, and in the underworld, which makes her the perfect being for witchcraft because she's all around. She's dealing with all the elements. So one thing that's really cool about her is she is a chthonic deity, which basically means that it has to do with the underworld or the other realms or under the soil, literally, or with the earth. And so she's sometimes written as the guardian of the underworld, much like Hades, but before Hades. And then she also rules over the souls of the departed. Her entourage was often made up of the souls of the dead, but even more so, it tended to be souls of dead women or girls who were unmarried or childless. Sneaky. She was also regarded as a spectral being who sent all kinds of demons and phantoms onto Earth to teach about sorcery and witchcraft, which does create kind of a weird lineage of witches and the occult to some extent. And she often appeared in cursed tablets in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome. She's even worshipped today by modern witches, which is really interesting. So her ties to modern witchcraft is like very distinct and pretty obvious. Now I want to talk about two supposedly real beings. Now you can debate Pate's reality as much as you wish, but these people most likely did live and breathe. And this is Circe and Medea. They're two pretty infamous women in ancient Greece related to witchcraft. So we're going to start with Circe. Trying to keep my notes together. So she's a goddess of sorcery, the daughter of Helios and Perseus, and she killed her husband, the king of somewhere or another, not important. And then she was expelled to, that's not important. He's not important to the story. But and then she was sent to the exile on the island of Aiaia, and she dwelled with nymphs and a bunch of animals, which we'll talk about in a second. So, unsurprisingly, the island was described as having lots of woods, lots of nature, and wild and untamed. And again, that kind of connects with the witch being just on the outskirts of civilization, just within the reach. But her famous story is with Odysseus in Homer's The Odyssey from around 750 BCE, where she is said to have, they landed on the island and they went to check her out and say, like, okay, what's going on? And she turned his men into pigs with pharmacon, which is basically drugs. It's like spelled elixirs kind of thing, and also a wand. She waved her wand and they turned into pigs. And then Odysseus went after, like, she can't turn my men into pigs. Went to try to stop her. He was able to avoid her drugs and her spooky things, but she's said to be a beautiful woman. He fell in love with her, ended up in her bed, and stayed with her for a whole year. Finally, his men, who were still pigs, were like, hey, we're kind of still here. We kind of need to get home. And he was like, oh shit. So he left. He was like, Circe, I gotta go. And she helped him leave. She provided him with good winds. She provided him with help to get home. She sent him to the underworld. Complicated, but in the end, she is good, depending on who you ask. Then we have Medea. I have a very soft spot in my heart for Medea because I think she was wronged by the men, but you know. She is not a goddess, unlike Circe. But she is related to Circe very distantly. I can't remember the lineage, Greek lineage stuff is confusing. But she was also really well known to use pharmacon. Her whole story is with Jason and the Argonauts. So Aphrodite forced her to fall in love with Jason because some other gods had a soft spot in their heart for Jason. And then she ended up betraying her homeland because she was in love with Jason, helped him get the golden fleece, which was under her father's rule, and then used her pharmacon or drugs to, I shouldn't say drugs, like spelled potions, basically, to help him get the fleece, and then they left. And she said, I'll help you as long as you agree to marry me. He was like, sure, yes, give me the fleece, I don't really care. But then, as with many men in the ancient world, he fell in love with another, and he betrayed her. And he exiled her off the land, and was like, peace, I'm gonna have my life with this new woman now. So, in her sadness or madness, depending on the source, she killed all of his kids with the other woman, killed his kids with her, and then pieced out of there and fled to an island, I think with Heracles, but it depends on the source you read. So that's their kind of tragic stories. But the important thing with them to note is they are both described as beautiful women. They use potions and drugs, and usually it has to do with men, but they're not considered ugly. They're never described as ugly. It's always about their beauty. But as we continue in the ancient world, we're gonna go to Rome, which this is where I know a lot more about. So this is where we start to see repercussions against witches. This is where we start to see a lot of legal things happening. So while it is important though to note that like the everyday person was using some form of magic, a lot of people in Rome carried amulets for protection. They would put organs over their houses to protect against unwanted people. They also did the curse tablets. They made curse tablets, like I mentioned. So they were practicing some variations of witchcraft, but not the witchcraft that we think of. So Roman people became very fearful, and with fear comes retaliation against an outside group. So these are two law codes that very convoluted. I'm not going to get into their details too intensely, but so the first one was the 12 Tables, which was written in the 5th century BCE, and it basically produced legal repercussions for any use of harmful magic. And some of them were even punishable under death. The Lex Cornelia de Sicariis, it's a long title, doesn't matter. It was written by Sola in 81 BCE, and this originally it was a document used to punish just any acts of malevolence, but over time became way more associated directly with witches. But again, I want to just emphasize that this anti-witch, almost anti-women rhetoric, it kind of came out of fear. So a lot of the things that they would blame on witches were things like illness of their child or death of their child, which isn't actually like theoretically possible for one person to do. It was things like their crops went bad. You know, they had fears, whether it was a political official afraid of another person using a witch to like aid them in their trials, things like that. So that's kind of where these things arose. But I want to talk about some real witches. These are my favorite witches, I will say. I love them. I probably am the only person, no, but one of the only people to say that they are my favorite. So this is from Horace's Epodes and Satires. This is from the Roman Empire, I think 1st century BCE through 1st century AD kind of thing. So the 4 witches are Canidia, Folia, Thea, and Sagana. You may or may not have ever heard of them, and that's okay. So these are feared by all, and they may or may not have been based off of real people. But unlike the women we just talked about, these women are described as hideous. They're described as ugly, as mean, as evil, as trying to just fuck with everyone. And often they are described as doing their magic either in graveyards, which again is always outside of the Roman city, so it's always just outside of the city in that liminal space, or in the wild and untamed areas. This is a quote describing them. So Canidia, with bare feet and hair unbound, howling with the elder Sagana, pallor had rendered both of them a horrendous sight. They began to scratch up the earth with their nails and to tear apart a black limb with their teeth. Blood was poured into a pit so that from there they could summon spirits from the shades to deliver answers. These women were known to steal bones from graves, to put erotic elixirs on men to try to make them theirs. They summoned spirits of the dead. They also kidnapped virgin boys for the use of their magic and buried them. There's a great, I can't remember if it's Satires or Epodes, but there's one great scene talking about that. I highly recommend. But their descriptions were never kind. Unlike the other women, they were never seen in a beautiful light. So that's kind of the shift between Greece and Rome. Another witch that was around the same time was the witch of Endor from the Bible. So if you're familiar, it's from 1 Samuel. King Saul is said to have called upon the witch of Endor to summon prophet Samuel to ask about how to defeat the Philistine army. So he asks her, she does his bidding, she's like, sure, whatever. And she pulls out Samuel and he's like, oh, you're gonna die. Your kids are gonna die and you're gonna die. And the next day, it's true. Saul's sons are killed in battle and he commits suicide. So again, the Bible, and there's also another verse, I think it's like, it's one of the E things that says something about sorcery. So the Bible is very not positive of witches, hence the papacy, which we'll get into in a second. So next, the medieval period in Europe, super fun. Everyone's excited about the witch trials, and that's where we're getting. There's no questions or anything on Zoom, right? I'm scared to mess with it. I'm gonna assume not. If you need something, just unmute. So first of all, in the 13th century, as we just went Bible-y, we're going to go to the church. And in the 13th century, the papacy declared that anyone practicing witchcraft was directly condemning God and defecting to the devil. So they were saying, if you practice witchcraft, you are practicing devil worship, basically. And this idea continued for about 3 centuries, thanks to the church. So that brings up probably the worst book ever written, the Malleus Maleficarum. This was written by 2 very sexually frustrated Dominican monks. And it basically is a manual to detect witches, to try witches, to torture witches. It's everything about what is a witch. And I mean, it's insane. Just read a few chapters. I don't know what it's called, but it's terrible. So this book can really be one of the main reasons that the witch trials happened. And for more than 100 years, this book was the most popular book in Europe besides the Bible. For more than 100 years. Oftentimes, the people who were targeted as witches were single women, widows, or other marginalized women. And then they'd be tortured into confession based off of this manual. So I just want to throw a statistic at you. I hate numbers, but we're doing it. So between 1500 and 1660, up to 80,000 men and women, but primarily women, were put to death. And that was with Germany having the highest witch death rate, and I think Ireland having the least amount of witches tried. And then now we're going to move to, oh wait. So what did this book say? How did they identify a witch? And there's a few things. So first of all, it's very in-depth, it's a long book, but just some basics. First of all, any sort of unbefitting behavior. This could be refusal to marry. This could be senility. Never say that right. So oftentimes a lot of women who were older or had mental illness were targeted as witches. Anybody with a harsh temper or promiscuity. Again, as a theme, the rejection of society. If there's any rejection of moral codes, independence, anybody that's already outcasted from society is going to be targeted as a witch. Then lastly, a lot of women who helped other women, they were promoting fertility or infertility, they were aiding an abortion, if they were just helping women in any way, that would be seen as a witch. And I don't know the statistics, but there is a bit of a misconception that mainly midwives were targeted. It wasn't just midwives, it was a lot of people. So that's some of the identification. But one of the worst identifying features, oftentimes the actions that were considered witchcraft by women were not actually physically possible to prove. So it was something like inflicting sickness of a child via spells, or ruining crops by burning substances. Things like that, like, how are you going to prove that? You're not. But in medieval Europe, they were like, we will find a way. And they came up with this idea of the witch's mark. So they believed that the devil would put a mark upon a witch, because they are, of course, serving the devil, somewhere on her body. And it could be literally any imperfection. It could be a wart, it could be a birthmark, it could just be a callus, it could be anything. So oftentimes women were in public, in a public setting, tons of people watching, much like this picture. They would be stripped of their clothing, shaved of all hair to ensure that they could see the mark, prodded with a pin, and trying to find this anything imperfect. And if they didn't find any blemishes, they would just still prod you with a pin until something felt like a blemish. I don't know. Absolute insanity. Yeah, and so this was a huge problem, and it tried a lot of trials with witches included this, and it's public humiliation, public shame, absolutely terrible. So now, the most infamous of the witch trials, even though a lot of the witch craziness happened in Europe, it did spread into America, into the British colonies. So in 1641, the Body of Liberties in Massachusetts wrote a decree declaring witchcraft a felony. And then about 40 years later, in 1688, Goody Glover was hanged in Boston as the first witch in America. Only 4 years after that, in 1892, in Salem, Massachusetts, what we know as the Salem witch trials started. So two young girls, one 9, one 11, Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams, suffered from body contortions, uncontrolled screaming, and fits, just tantrums. And that prompted them to be tried as witches. And in their defense, they claimed, oh, it wasn't us. We have been expelled. We have been casted, spelled on by other witches. And they then accused 3 outcasts of society: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and a enslaved woman named Tituba. And these women then were tried. I don't know what happened to them, but they were tried. Quickly, mass hysteria spread. Oh, before I say that though, I will say modern scholars have looked into this, and they believe that this could have just been either mental illness that happened, they were just experiencing mental illness, just a general fever or flu, some sort of sickness. It could have been just general boredom. They were kids in, rural Salem doing who knows what, But there's a scholar that thinks it could have been a fungus that spread, I believe, through like molded bread, which then could potentially be a reason for the mass hysteria that followed. But yeah, regardless, they're like, wasn't witchcraft. They just had other troubles. So after this, a lot of women became accused. Many people began accusing their neighbors, their family members, their friends of witchcraft. And at the end of it, over 200 people were accused and 20 were put to death. One of them was a man who was literally put to death by crushing, like stones, being crushed under stones, which is insane. It was bloody, it was horrible, it was terrifying. But eventually, thank God, the witch hunts ended. And why? Why did we go from literally 1692 to about the 18th century, which is 1700s? How did it end? Capitalism. Ironically, the thing that we hate the most, led to a wonderful end to the witch hunt. So because a lot of the witch hunts occurred in a time of feudal society, which feudalism confuses me, but it's basically just where everyone gets plots of lands and it's more shared and everyone gets a little plot and they do what they want and there's like hierarchy and medieval stuff. So with capitalism and the acquiring of wealth and the ability to have wealth, for whatever reason, people weren't as willing to accuse witches of witchcraft. So Holland was the first European country to end the witch hunts in 1610, and Italy was the last in 1791. But I do want to say that just because women weren't literally being killed, patriarchy still endured, and women were still being oppressed in different ways. But as I mentioned, I will briefly talk about the non-European witchcraft, which again is it's far more different than European, and it's hard to compare. We want to put these ideas of magic and these ideas of superstition and these ideas of witch as we understand it in the white European lens upon like African societies or Asian societies or indigenous people in the Americas. And you can't really do that. You can to some extent, but as we know, anthropologists and people of the past tend to fuck it up. So, and it's important to understand that colonialization like greatly affected the way we understand these and the way that these were interpreted, and they tended to be interpreted in a much more negative light than they likely are in these civilizations. One anthropologist with the last name of Misaki writes that studies of the evolution and role of witchcraft in the African continent are fraught with sensational and derogatory overtones. And that's pretty true of just about any non-Western, non-white group of people. For example, an anthropologist named E. Evans Pritchard, he studied a tribe, I think it's Nizami, I should know this is embarrassing, but studied a tribe, he studied the witches in that tribe, and declared that they had a sort of a dichotomy between witches and I think he said sorcery. And he was like, witches are not good, they tend to be negative, sorcerers are good, positive, very different. And then, and that's not the best description of that, I won't lie, do look into it if you're interested. But the point is, other anthropologists took this as a definition and then continued to use this and like for any civilization they encountered. And that just doesn't work. You can't take a definition from one specific group of people and be like, we're gonna put it on everybody and it's gonna work, because it doesn't. So it's a very convoluted, very complicated thing to talk about. But I will indulge you. I will talk about two. So these are two stereotypes that are largely misunderstood, and I don't even understand them well enough because that's like a whole other research project. But first I want to talk about the idea of the witch doctor in a lot of pre-colonial African civilizations. The witch doctor is, again, a huge misconception. It should really be called the anti-witchcraft doctor. But in my opinion, they take a lot of similarities between what we consider like a positive witch in the Western society. Again, this is coming from a very Western lens. And I will say everything I read about these were from Western authors, so take it with a grain of salt. But basically the anti-witch doctor used good energy and good like positive light to get rid of the darkness, get rid of the things that were harming their society. And they're said to use the powers of good, often using charms, herbal medicine, rituals, and more to help their communities against harm. Another one on the right, which again, not a very good picture, but I didn't find any that weren't like absolutely ridiculous. I went with the best I could find. So the Navajo tribe, along with some other indigenous groups, believe in these things called skinwalkers. In the Navajo language, apologies for the mispronunciation, but it's Yi Nablu Ushi. And these are described as evil witches who can morph themselves into an animal, to look like an animal. And they're believed to be able to take over animal form or human form and even take over the body of another living human. And again, those are more negative, but it's a very convoluted thing, and a lot of indigenous groups aren't as willing to offer information about their tribes for protection of themselves, and that's totally valid. But again, like I mentioned, the sources I read were all from white people. So, you know, it's something that's not really our place to know and not our place to compare. Our last stop, I promise this is the last stop in this journey of witchcraft, is to the modern witches. The so-called New Age witch, the neo-pagan revival of the 20th century. It's mainly found in the Western world. There's not really any examples that I saw from like Asia or even Africa or anywhere like that. It's considered an alternative to like the Judeo-Christian faith. It is considered a religion. And it tends to feature various elements connecting with the earth. So oftentimes it's a very nature-driven religion, but it's really cool because it's very versatile. It's very individual. You can be a witch if you want to be. You don't have to be. You can join a coven if you want to. You can just specifically follow a type of witchcraft if you want to. You don't have to. But there's a lot of different witches, like a ton. If you just look up like modern types of witch, like hundreds of articles appear. It's crazy. So we're just going to focus on a few of the most popular and ones that intrigued me. So we're going to start with Wicca. I'm sure you all have heard of it. You might have seen it. Wicca is the word with think Germanic roots. I should know that. Whatever. Has a long background. But so this was actually founded by a man, which is kind of, I don't know, to me funny, but you know, whatever. Named Gerald Gardner in the mid-1900s. Sorry, gotta add my own opinions. So it's a nature-based religion with no specific book, but the only motto is to do no harm. It has various branches, including one that's like a female-centered one that's for gay and bisexual men specifically, like tons of different things. And it is still practiced, again, like I said, which is really cool. So practitioners of Wicca call themselves witches, and they convene in a coven. And they tend to have 13 people in the coven. That's considered a lucky or perfect number to them. And they often have a high priest or high priestess like leading the circles. And that is reflective of, they believe there is a goddess and a god. I think it's like a horned god and a something goddess. Sorry. But they generally meet at night to practice magic, and they form a circle, sometimes with salt, sometimes with their theme, which is that thing on the right. So they have different rituals and different things, but each coven is specific to their own, and like no coven has to be the same. Oftentimes one coven will have a book of shadows that kind of has the information of what the coven practices, what they believe, and then they can continue on with that. Some Wiccan groups perform their rituals skyclad or naked, while others prefer dedicated robes to practicing magic. Some people just are like, wear whatever you want, doesn't matter. But yeah, they believe in a mother goddess and a horned god that they honor in ritual, and the seasons they believe reflect this cycle of the god and goddess like courting and birthing and dying, and we'll get into that. But some of the other types of witches that aren't necessarily related to Wicca, these are just some that I was like, oh, these are cool. So there's a kitchen witch. So this is a witch who focuses on cooking, baking, anything in the kitchen. They put their magic into that. And oftentimes they're the one that would bring like cakes to ceremonies or food to rituals or things like that. The green witch is a witch who focuses on the natural world. So literally with plants, with herbs. It's a lot about healing. Sometimes they're herbalists, sometimes they're just nurturers. The eclectic witch is someone who just draws from any tradition. They don't follow one specific path. They might be really into crystals and also follow astrology, or also, you know, believe in herbalism and things like that. But there's like so many others. There's cosmic witches, there's sea witches, there's I don't know, there's so many I can't. But the last thing I just want to briefly mention, which actually has a lot of influence on our calendar and our holidays. So the Wheel of the Year is something that Wiccans believe, but also other witches follow too. Wiccans believe this has a lot to do with, again, the rebirth and death of the god and goddess. So we'll start with Yule and go into each of these real brief. Yule happens at the winter solstice around December 21st-ish. And this symbolizes the rebirth of the god and the return of the fertile season coming. Often witches will sacrifice offerings, have a feast, and they'll give gifts to the gods and goddesses. One thing that I think is really interesting, so Stonehenge in England, it aligns perfectly where the winter solstice at sunrise and sunset hits it perfectly in like a really nice way. So I don't know if that's pagan, but could be. Imbolc is February 1st. It's the first stirrings of spring. It's a time for purification, literal spring cleaning, which we do, a lot of people do. And it's anticipation of the life to come in the year. Astara happens at the spring equinox. I believe this is connected to our Easter, is that right, Steph? Yeah. It's around March 21st, and this is when light and darkness are supposed to be in balance again. And light is on the rise as the seasons change. And then this is a time of new beginnings. And then Beltane is the first of summer around May 1st. And this is a time when they recognize the power of life and they celebrate and they appreciate the greening of the world, youthfulness and flourishing. This is also Wicca when they believe the god is courting and impregnating the goddess. And then midsummer or Litha occurs on the summer solstice, and it's kind of the turning point when summer's at its height, but it's about to become, you know, the decline. So it's a celebration of the sun at its greatest strength. It's a celebration, a turning point for the wheel. The harvest festival of Lammas or Lughnasadh occurs around August 1st, and that's kind of just a Thanksgiving for bread and grain and the start of the harvest season. Mabon occurs on the autumn equinox, and again, another kind of Thanksgiving, but more generous, like more fruits of the earth, not just grains. And then that's also when they tend to give blessings to the god and goddess, recognizing that they're about to be in their declining phases. Lastly, top left is Samhain. Very important to pronounce it Samhain. I've seen so many TikToks about witches being like, it's Samhain, not Samhain, so it's Samhain, God forbid. So this is coming up. This is like next week. It's October 31st, November 1st. And this is when they believe that the veil between our realm and the afterworld, the afterlife, is at its thinnest. So oftentimes, just like our Halloween, kind of where that stems from, oftentimes witches will host what they call a dumb supper, which sounds ridiculous, but it's actually kind of, I think, kind of beautiful. So this is when they create a very big meal, kind of again a Thanksgiving of sorts, but it's to honor their ancestors that have passed, their friends who have passed, their pets who have passed, anyone that is in the afterlife. So often they'll have a dinner, set a place or two for maybe one, maybe multiple of their deceased friends or family or pets, and they'll oftentimes do this by candlelight. They'll have their dinner by candlelight and silence. Nobody says anything. And it's just a time to like allow for their ancestors to join them for dinner, enjoy the space, enjoy the silence, just enjoy their company. But yeah, I've heard this really good podcast called Witch. It's on BBC. Highly recommend. One of the covens the interviewer talked to said that they chose to just talk. They were like, why would our ancestors want to come to silence? And they were like, we're gonna make it a whole ass party, kind of like what we're doing. So that was fun. But yeah, so it's a great time. Salon, which is coming up, it's a great time to celebrate, appreciate those who have passed on, appreciate the life that we have. And then a few things, pomegranates are considered sacred as they refer to Persephone, which, we didn't talk about, but Greek and Roman stuff. And then also the pumpkin symbolizes wisdom and insight and honors the ancestors of turning the wheel, which is probably why we use pumpkins around Halloween. But to close, I want to just draw this full circle, much like the wheel of the year, and go back to my original question. So what is a witch? There's not really an easy answer. We've seen the European ideals of a witch. We've looked at that. But it's clear that the modern world around us has a witch at all times. There's always a witch around throughout history. That's why she is transcendent. She's everywhere, but nowhere, but probably all around us. I know some of us are. And it's just, she's a beautiful thing. And she's wonderful that she defies the societal order. She defies expectations. She's persevered throughout hardship, throughout oppression. It's funny because as I've been researching this, I've been sort of pondering, am I a witch? As one does. And the more I research, the more I learn, the more I realize that we all probably are. If you're interested in this, if you're here out of choice and you think about witches, you're like, what happened? Maybe you like the Salem witch house, you're probably a witch. It's just I did not think about the fact that not everyone thinks about witches regularly, and that in and of itself is telling. But I think that the witch finds you when you most need her. She calls you from the forest, she brings you roses and love and happiness and growth, and she's just always there at the hidden edges of reality, in the unknown, and we really need her, especially right now. I know this is a touchy subject, but global warming is real. Please don't argue with me. I don't want to hear it. And there's a lot of just anger in the world. There's a lot of distress. There's a lot of fear right now, especially with the global events happening. And that's kind of when we really need the witch. We need someone who is dedicated to nature. We need someone who is connected to the natural world and connected to her friends, connected to the dichotomies of life. And that's why I think it's super interesting that the witch is becoming such a global phenomenon and is becoming reawakened. So I leave you with that. Here. And I will open up questioning and get off right. Cool. Okay. Questions? Or did I just do such a good job?
How do you separate the wannabe witch with the real witch?
So it's funny because witches actually have a term for that. They call new or wannabe witches baby witches. Or there's another term that I can't remember. But it depends. Honestly, I didn't find an answer. I think it's a very personal choice. Anybody that does anything that is witchy, maybe you light incense, maybe you use sage to clear your house, maybe you blow out a candle at a birthday party. All of those are witchy in nature. They have to witch you back to food and elements. It's up to the individual, and I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, honestly. That's kind of I don't feel authorized to say. Yeah.
I think you guys, can you get up there because it's hard for them to hear and see you. If you don't mind, thank you.
I'm trying to move this.
So that was a lot of information. Thank you so much, and that was wonderful.
Which Amy,
I think you were talking about the countries or the places that were killing witches, and I think you said Ireland had the least amount. And I found that interesting because it seems like Ireland has a lot of pagan roots. And do you know why certain places
I love this question. Sorry.
May have killed more and others less, where they can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So this was something I did encounter, and in the podcast I mentioned, they do talk about this a little bit, but it's interesting because they noticed that a lot of the countries that have less killings of witches, have less witch trials, did have a much more a higher connection with nature. It tended to be the ones that had more of the natural religions, the pagan elements in them, deep rooted, whereas countries like Germany, which had the highest rate, had a pretty strong tie to Christianity and to feudalism. So the sources I read theorize that a lot of it does have to do with how intertwined the witch is with the culture kind of thing, and how natural not just the country, but also the people, like the people within the country, the government or the society, how nature oriented they are. But yeah, great question. Great question.
Would it also be,
Can you get
the druids kind of assimilated?
Yeah.
It assimilated in the Irish are so magic leprechaun, they're
Yeah.
just druids at heart and
Yeah.
that's their ancestry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Ancestral ties have like very intense roots, but it's also interesting because like Italy was one of the last countries to disband the witch hunts.
Italy?
Mm-hmm. I think they were the last in like 1790 or something. I don't know. That seems late, but. Any other thoughts? Anybody on Zoom have any questions or thoughts?
I have something.
Oh, Alicia has.
Okay, so when I was in New Orleans, once I was wandering around by myself, and of course I had to go into these creepy places because that's what I do, and I try to make talk to people. You guys all know that I do this like in an Uber. I get to know the Uber driver. I met a high priestess and a high priest in New Orleans in these creepy places. So
yeah,
but I mean I don't even know what that means. What's that mean?
Okay,
Is that voodoo?
no, so possibly voodoo is voodoo is complicated because it is kind of a form of witchcraft, but because it does have so much like Creole and Afro, Creole, Caribbean. I don't know enough about voodoo. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because that's not something I'm very aware of, to be honest. But the high priest and priestess, oftentimes a coven, especially the Wiccan covens, will have a high priest and high priestess. And they're just kind of the ones that run the coven. They're the ones that might lead the discussion, lead the circle. But they also, they just lead, honestly. And like, it depends, coven to coven, it depends on what they do and what they practice. But like I read, so during one of the festivals, it's the one where the god is impregnating. I want to say it's Beltane, but I could be wrong. Some covens choose to have the high priest and high priestess like willingly engage in intercourse, obviously not public, like private, but it's like the representation of the god and goddess doing their thing. So there's stuff like that. So it's interesting. It's really coven to coven dependent on like what they want, but it gets a little weird sometimes. I mean, no judgment, just gets a little wonky compared to this modern standard. Wonky. I don't know. Other thoughts, questions?
Modern,
No, go ahead.
do you think modern witches are taking the role of, let's say, shamans? In other words, modern witches in the Western world, are they taking the role of shamans in like the old world, if you will, or?
No, I don't think so.
And can you make sure they can hear?
Sorry. The question was, are modern witches kind of taking over the role of shamans in the Western world like they did, in the past? And I would say no, because I think shamans still exist, first of all. And shamans have a far deeper, like spiritual, a more ancient connection, I think. Like oftentimes to be a shaman, it can be either bloodlines, it can be something you have to be initiated into. And I think the modern witch is kind of, I don't personally think of it like a religion. I think of it more as a societal, it can be it's a spirituality more than it's a religion, whereas I think a shaman is more of a religious practice, because oftentimes shamans are the ones leading like ayahuasca retreats, things where it's like far more, it's a lot, I don't want to compare it, if that makes sense. Like I think it's hard to compare these two situations or two beings. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? I'm not an expert on shaman.
So people of my generation, which is the over 60 crowd, sometimes our first encounter with the witch theme was the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
So my question to you is, in the Wizard of Oz, we have the Wicked Witch, and then we have the Good Witch, and they're depicted both visually audibly, just their voices are different, they look different, the colors of that they're depicted are different. Why is that?
I mean, I think honestly.
And does that sort of create a duality of witches that is contrary to what historically people have thought of them?
I think it honestly is closer related to ancient Greco-Roman ideas of witchcraft than the modern ideas of witchcraft. However, I think, I mean, looking back, like when we talked about ancient Greece versus ancient Rome, how in ancient Greece, a lot of times the witches of ancient Greece were seen as beautiful. They were depicted as beautiful. They were still scary to men, you know, but they were beautiful. I think their beauty was what was scary to people. Whereas in ancient Rome, they became this hideous, ugly, frightening, like thing. So to me, I think they both drew on that knowledge of how the ancient people kind of thought of superstition and thought of witchcraft, while also definitely pulling into the stereotype of the witch trials for that Wicked Witch of the West. And that to me is like more directly related than the Good Witch. I think the Good Witch would be more almost like I don't know what the comparison would be, but I wouldn't consider her like how ancient depictions of a witch were. Did that answer your question fully?
Somewhat.
What else would you?
But it would seem that you wouldn't have witch trials to persecute the good witch, only the bad witch.
Just, pardon me, to make sure they can hear, because.
Can you all hear that? Okay, cool. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it was definitely a change. I think in that sense, yes, it's a shift, and that they did create this duality. And I think that's kind of why the Wizard of Oz is so revolutionary. And it is interesting to see how the Wicked Witch of the West took over, like created this big phenomenon. Like I remember watching, there's like an interview with her somewhere, the woman who played her, and she's like, I love that character. She talks about how much she loves it and how she would have kids come up to her and be like, oh my God, can you do the voice? And the Glinda the Good Witch, I feel like didn't really get as much of that. I could be wrong though. This is just from the little bit I've read about it. But I do think it was a change. It was definitely a change. And I don't really think that happened in the witch trials. There wasn't really a good witch. Any witch was bad. Like there wasn't such a thing during the medieval era of a good witch at that point. Did that answer your question? What am I missing? Sorry, I'm trying.
Well, there might not be a solid answer.
Yeah.
Does anyone online have something?
Any thoughts, Sumis?
Is there something practical that the modern witches do?
Practical?
In other words, can they
Tribute to humankind.
Well, can they help, for example, let's say somebody suffered a loss in their family or something. Can a witch or a certain kind of witch can that witch try to summon some kind of a spirit, to reconcile whatever,
Yeah.
Is that something that exists, in the witch world, in the modern witch world today?
It depends on who you ask. I would say yes. So I wish Isabella was here to talk about some of the quantum stuff, but a lot of things with witchcraft is energy based. So like a lot of, that's why crystals are a thing. A lot of people who use crystals believe that the energy of that crystal has a specific connection to energy patterns. And so there's things such as Reiki healing, which Nicole, if she was here, she could talk more about. So there are ways that witches do. It's more of a spiritual, it's nothing, there are physical elements. I mean, like tea, for example, think about how chamomile is known to help with sleep, whereas like green tea is going to help you wake, but also create like kind of a calming effect. Depending on what type of witch you are, what you know, like herbalism, like a lot of people will go to herbalists instead of doctors, for like the holistic medicine. So there's validity in that. But again, like I can't say that with give you a definitive answer, because it really is based on the person. It's based off of the personal connection with things. Sometimes, like I believe in Reiki healing. I believe in the power of crystals, and I also believe, I will say, there's something said about the power of just pure manifestation of want, like the power of wanting something to happen. And it can be pure chance, but you don't know, like maybe I spend a week, I don't know, a month, whatever, trying to manifest a job, or just putting in putting energy out into the universe, saying this person has went through loss, I want to send them healing energy. Maybe I make them, some witches might make them like some sort of concoction, I don't know. Whether or not that works, there's not really any empirical way to say yes, that works. But I wish I could remember what it's called. There is a quantum thing that's like, I wish I could remember. It's like quantum random something or something like that. But there are quantum mechanics involved that can kind of potentially venture the idea that this is possible. But again, it's like quantum stuff, so it's hard to prove like anything else. But on like the general societal side of things, it's hard to say, because energy, I think, changes things, but some people would be like, that's ridiculous. But then I also think if a witch's intention is always positive, then there's not going to be any harm done, Well, with, if their positive intention is genuinely positive, not like, I'm going to go kill a cat to bring back my husband. I don't know. Like, that's obviously just, don't do that. Anybody else have thoughts on that, though? I know there's some other people in the room who have ties and thoughts and.
Yeah, somebody online has ties.
Who? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 3 of the women who were hung in Salem are like my 11-time great aunties. And
Wow.
I'm a descendant of their brother. So I know a lot about the Salem witch trials. It's kind of family lore. My dad's cousin was a genealogist, and he found all this stuff out like back in the early 1980s. So we've all been pretty schooled in what went on in the witch trials. And of course, all the theories about, it was a fungus, or these girls were playing games and they got caught and they didn't want to get punished for playing the games. So they started pointing fingers. And then there was also the theory that some of the powers that be, a lot of the people who were hung and the man who was pressed to death, they were wealthy landowners and they wanted their land. So they were accused of witchcraft so that they could be gotten rid of, so their land could be come back into other people in the community. So all of those different theories, scenarios, could possibly be true. We just don't know for sure. Or maybe all of them. I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I also had a thought about the good witch, bad witch thing, especially Wizard of Oz. She was more like a fairy godmother. So your fairy godmother would be a good witch.
And we know
harshly of fairy godmothers. They help you, they bring you good fortune, they take care of your problems. So there were the good witches. We just didn't call them witches. They were fairy godmothers.
A really good point. I do think there is, it's interesting to see how history has declared the witch such a negative thing, but then things like fairy godmothers have been this positive source of, oh my God, my mother's telling me to stand up. Like human interaction and childhood intrigue and like, yeah, very good. That's very interesting. But Sophia, go ahead.
When like talking about the Salem witch trials, I'm curious why like Salem in particular, what is like has like endured through history as like the American representation of it. Like I assume it was happening other places as well, or like why do we think it was isolated to like Massachusetts in particular, and then like Salem of all places?
I don't know. But I can make an oh, Dara, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, Salem, they were Puritans and they were very harsh and very strict. And they really, everything was all about going to the Sunday meeting, in their church houses. And if you didn't go, and some of these people were not churchgoers, they were considered outcasts. So that kind of falls into the, witches, you're a witch if you're an outcast, a societal outcast. You're not conventional. You don't follow the conventional norms. And Massachusetts Bay Colony was extremely puritanical. So they weren't very tolerant, which is why, who was the guy that he broke off and established Rhode Island, because he wanted a more religiously tolerant community or colony. So that's what I know.
I also imagine it's just because so many people were accused. Like it was 200 accused, 20 put to death, and I mean in a very short time period, it just happened in such a way that was like the mass hysteria that broke out, I imagine has a lot to do with why it stayed prevalent throughout history. And America, we love our good sob story. We love a good Other comments?
I have another question of whether or not there will be a costume contest. Not for myself, because I would not win, but I see lots of great costumes, so I'm just wondering. And a great wig.
There will indeed. There will indeed. Would you like to judge it, Sophia?
Yes.
I knew. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions? And then we can do that. Okay.
Well, there is one dressed up there. So
I know. All right. I'll turn on the lights a little more and then I'll let y'all come show off.
I feel like cocktail.
Yeah. Yes. Salon.
Oh, well, let me
Okay. Oh yeah. Announce the next one. I forgot. I didn't make a thing yet. Sorry.
Okay, thank you guys for coming to the Shine On Salon again, and really glad you came, especially when you came from the Netherlands. Is that where you are?
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Anyway, next month, Deborah, I know you guys met her in a previous salon. She's a yoga instructor, fabulous woman. She's going to do it, I believe, November 12th on meditation. So I hope you guys can all
Information to come.
Information to come. And by the way, Juliette is the brains behind Shine On Salon. She's the one that does all the website, and yeah, she rocks. So.
If you want to hire me, you can.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm gonna stop recording unless we're done.
It's fun.
I'm not gonna stop recording. There you go.
All right, so Amy, go. She's gonna. Sophia and T are gonna. Hi, T. This is Amy.
Hello. I brought my pet spider. And my little purse. This is my, but this isn't really a costume. I just wear this every day.
Yay.
I don't have a good. This is my non-custom costume.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yes, you're not on
This is my non-costume costume.
Yay.
Yay. What they can't see are the awesome boots.
The boots,
They can't see the boots. Yeah, they can't see the boots.
Mary,
I don't think I could kick that.
are you not a coach? You're not a coach. Okay.
I could take one.
Bill?
I'm
Come on. He had a mustache on earlier.
Well, I know, but it keeps. I'll hold it.
Just show the sweatshirt saying.
Cousin.
Yay.
Oh.
Yes.
You have to show off your legs.
Yeah.
Yes, I brought a little bit of the
I can
bad witch with me because I wore her song.
show. Yeah. Come on, Steph. The birthday girl.
Yeah,
I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. They're gonna get, wait, back up a little bit. Yeah, look at that.
I love the dress.
Love the dress. Is it working? Hold on. Hold on. Let me just,
You gotta show the shoe.
oh, I realize what I can do. I'm stupid.
I don't know how I can ship the shoes.
A little higher, a little higher. There you go. They're witchy shoes. They're witchy shoes. Okay, Alicia.
Count, I can't pick me.
Come on.
You can't pick me, but this me.
Trying to get the shoes on.
Because I'm the best.
Well, you can pick me gladly.
Oh, Juliette.
Wait, but I'm showing the shoes. Wait.
You're first.
I'm not gonna do that since I can work out.
I know. There you go.
And the owl, oh my God.
I got the boots for $10. Yes, please. Oh, let me. Oh my God, amazing.
All these witches hats on them.
We have more.
Oh, we do.
Here,
Okay.
here.
So thank you.
She's got the witch's hat
Yeah,
too.
now it's.
She got the
got my-
whole.
Owl.
Can you see the owl?
That's
There you go. Laura.
Laura, come on.
What about the hat?
Come on.
What does it
Just
matter?
take the hat. Come on.
Put black on, just wearing a hat.
All right, Gary.
No.
Okay, well, Gary has a nice jacket on.
And Rainier.
And Rainier has the beautiful wig.
Yes.
Okay. We have been deliberating. Oh, shit.
And what's your name?
It's horrifying.
Do you need help?
Okay,
Gotta reach out for the story.
do we have a winner? Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, what's our top three? Should we just say the winner? Okay. We'll wait for.
Well, that last.
But mostly just.
Guys,
That
do
usually
you
happens.
know the announcement?
She has hair really long. She said. Everybody is just, yeah.
I really don't know.
I don't know.
There's something I don't know. Okay,
That's a problem.
have y'all deliberated?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
First honorable mention for Amy and Rainier. And the winner is the person with the masquerade ball mask. Yeah.
On behalf of the Netherlands, Rainier and Amy, I accept this award as an honorable mention. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You should be proud.
Going up, I got one more thing for you. That's stupid.
I can't take it off. Champagne. Oh my goodness, look at that.
That's the big prize. It's a
Oh.
fancy.
Damn.
So thank you.
I want one.
I'll get a picture.
Oh, which is right.
Yay! All right, can you do it? Up to, thank you.
Gotta get the whole.
It's for Juliette's
Instagram.
Instagram for Shine on Salon. Congrats.
Wow.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Schools and fools alike. And
Yeah.
everyone else.
See you
Thanks,
guys at the next.
Or witches and bitches, I should say.
Oh, Amy,
Amy has nothing to say. Other Amy, yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing to say. Just here to support.
Love you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Good job.
Great job.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.